we start today with a question. Given the game mechanics of an RPG, the dice rolling system, the way that combat works, the way that characters are created, the way that characters level, the way that monsters are created, given all of that, does the rules system of a game influence or indicate what types of stories we experience at the table? I would answer that's a resounding yes. The game mechanics indicate that certain stories are going to be natural fits to this gameplay style. And so we can ask the question of the Marvel Multiverse game. What types of stories will you find in your game of Marvel Multiverse that you may not have seen in other RPGs? So that's what we're talking about today. Normal disclaimer, I'm making this video as of Rules Update 1.3, which is before the full rulebook is released later this year. So if there are new rules errata or changes when the full rulebook comes out, I might need to update a video that would discuss any alterations to my commentary here. But as of today, we're taking a look at 3 types of stories and games that can happen in Marvel Multiverse that you just may not have experienced before. Our first question has to do with how the level of a character really coheres with the game mechanics. In other words, do certain character levels just feel better in play than other ones? And this is oftentimes true in an RPG. For instance, if we're talking about Dungeons & Dragons, there is a recognized sweet spot for character levels, and this is generally recognized to be between levels 5 and 11, or sometimes 5 and 13. So what happens at character level 5 that makes it the point when D&D all clicks? The answer has to do with abilities. So if you are a martial class in 5th edition, then at 5th level you get extra attack, doubling your output in combat. If you are a spellcaster, you get 3rd level spells. And 3rd level spells are arguably the most powerful spells relative to their level in the game. This is where counterspell, haste, slow, dispel magic, all of those come into play. So a character's concept clicks at about 5th level. This is where half-casters get their 2nd level spells as well, which is wonderful, and it's the first point when the damage from your cantrips levels up. So much happens at 5th level, and it's where your concept of your character comes online. Earlier in the game, you don't have as much differentiation, spellcasters aren't really able to break reality to the same degree, and martial classes aren't dealing nearly as much damage output as they will do very soon. So what does this mean in relationship to the Marvel Multiverse game? Well, the Marvel Multiverse game has only 6 ranks. And here is the really exciting part for those of us who want to run a full campaign, or for those of us who might want to deal in origin stories. Marvel Multiverse works just fine at rank 1. In fact, it works great at rank 1. You still get 3 superpowers, you can still bring your character concept to life right away. And that means that you can do origin stories, you can do low power level play, and the game is still exciting because the characters at the table still feel like the vision that you had for them when you first sat down to make a character. This is great. In other, especially fantasy RPGs, we are trying to rush through early levels of play, but you don't need to do that in Marvel Multiverse. The early levels are great storytelling, and I think that a lot of great stories can happen between just ranks 1 and 2. I ran rank 1 in my campaign for longer than I've ever ran first level in any other game system because it worked and it allowed for interesting stories. An additional point to this, we make villains in Marvel exactly the same way that we make heroes. It's the same character building process. And as a result, I can make interesting and appropriate villains for any level of play. With other game systems, if you have a low-level player, then the monsters that you have available to throw at them are either way too deadly or are just boring to run in game. That's not true in the Marvel Multiverse. So run lower level parts of your campaign and feel comfortable running them for longer. It's a lot of fun. Here's an interesting question for you. What is the table size we anticipate for a particular RPG? This is not a silly question, because when we take a look at encounter balancing, when we take a look at monsters challenge rating, these things assume not just the level of the players, but the number of players at the table. If you take a look at the Dungeon Master's Guide in Dungeons & Dragons, you'll find that it explicitly says that monsters and combat encounters are generated assuming there are 4 player characters at the table. So we assume in that game, in encounter design, that we have a game master and 4 players. But what if you don't have 4 players? Well, certainly we can run Starfinder, Pathfinder, we can run D&D with smaller tables, but once we get to 3, we feel that that's kind of the bounded limit. Other game systems are actually better at smaller table size. Call of Cthulhu has wonderful adventures for only 2 player characters, and in fact, the starter set comes with a 1 player and 1 game master game ready to go out of the box, which is wonderful. 1 player and 2 player games in Starfinder or Pathfinder or D&D are much harder to run. But what about Marvel? Here's a cool thing about the way that the game works. It's actually great with small table size. I have ran 1 player games and they work great. In fact, if you take a look at the comics that this game is supposed to emulate, we find that a lot of comics are one superhero against the world. That's how Daredevil works most of the time. That's how Spider-Man works most of the time. But we also have great capacity for being able to do larger table size. The second adventure that's going to be released for this system is an X-Men adventure that's due out next year. That's cool, right? They're specifically saying build a full party, build a table of 4 to 7 players. You're going to be great. But I'm also here to tell you that the game works really well at small table size. 1 player or 2 players work great. So you can do stories with small table size that you aren't able to do in other game systems. Let's say that you're playing your game of Pathfinder and you have your fighter or you have your monk or your wizard character, and people ask about who are you? Who are you really? This is normally a pretty silly, innocuous, or non-important question at a Pathfinder or a D&D table, right? I am this adventurer. I go on adventures to do X, Y, and Z. Maybe I just have an oath. Maybe I have a backstory. But this is who I am. I am an adventurer. And these are good stories, right? The heroes who stand up to go and do a big deed. And their identity as a person is tied to their identity as somebody who does good works. There are good, fun stories. But there are other stories as well, and fantasy games on the market don't lend themselves to it. But explicitly in the concept we have of the game and in the playtest rulebook, the Marvel Multiverse game explicitly asks you to think of 2 sides to your character: their superhero and their secret identity. Now, you might choose to play a character like Iron Man, whose secret identity is not secret, is known publicly. That's a perfectly valid choice. But I think most players are going to do the secret identity route. And as a result, I, as the game master, as the narrator, get to run 2 separate worlds. I get to run your mundane world, and I get to run your superhero world. And specifically, I get to run situations where the 2 merge with each other, where they combat each other, where they're in conflict with each other, or where you have to choose between obligations in both worlds. We don't see this storyline happen all that often in other systems. I've never played or ran a game in D&D or in Starfinder where the players are trying to manage two separate lives. But I can tell you from running Marvel Multiverse, this is an interesting story, and it makes for exceptionally good gameplay and exceptionally good roleplay at the table. We get to tell these more complex stories, and our players have to make more nuanced and interesting choices, and whichever way they go, it alters the world, which means that our players really do feel that their choices impact the way that the world operates, which is what you want out of an RPG. All right, so I've been playing this game for a little while now, and these are the three major aspects of storylines that are different in Marvel Multiverse that I have experienced. There might be others I talk about going forward. If you have any aspects of gameplay that you've experienced that are really different than other systems, I'd love to hear about them in the comments below. As always, YouTube is literally made out of buttons. They're all over here. I hope you press some of them, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye. Oh, by the way, before I forget, I do run a game of Marvel Multiverse over at startplaying.games. I will put a link in the description below. Thanks again.